Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. And so now we can officially kick off this online workshop jointly organized by three Horizon 2020 projects that are frESCO, Ambience, and SENSEI. I officially welcome to this workshop that is about from commercial to residential extending energy performance contracts. I'm Serena Scotton. I work as project manager at Rena Consulting, and today I'll be the moderator for this workshop. Let's start by showing you the agenda for this event. So as you can see from the agenda, today we will not have the traditional project presentations, but instead we will have four topics of discussion that are market and regulatory framework, strategies to promote energy efficiency and reduce the costs, emerging business models and actors, and risks and opportunities. So in these four topics of discussion, each project speaker will have the time to present its own point of view. We will have an active discussion among the three projects, and then we will have a common Q&A session right at the end of this event. Some rules for this event. So if you want to submit your questions to the speaker, as you can see, you have the questions chat. You can submit all your questions there. Since the questions will be arrived only me and the other backend moderator can see the questions, I kindly ask you every time you send your question to please indicate the name or the name of the speaker of the name of the project, thus we can easily identify to whom speaker you want to address it. So now that we have presented the agenda, let's get to the focus of this workshop. So as you can see here, the three projects Horizon 2020 projects, they are all in the second phase of the lifetime of the projects. They all have in common the fact that they deal with energy performance contracting, which is a form of creating financing for capital improvement, which allows funding energy upgrades from cost reductions. In these schemes, ESCO implements a project to improve the energy efficiency or the renewable energy production and uses this stream of incomes from the cost savings to repay actually the overall cost of the project. Despite the large economic energy saving potential, we noticed that just very few ESCO apply the energy performance contracting scheme, while these three projects that we are going to present to you today wants to deliver the next generation of the energy performance contracting to be applied to the residential sector. Under the principle of pay for performance, that is a way to achieve a return of investment based on proven and measured energy savings in building, or via active energy performance contracting that will be actually presented afterwards by my colleagues. So this is a short introduction. My colleague will also have the time to go into more details about the EPC and P4P schemes during this session. Now, before we start the first topic of discussion, that is market and regulatory frameworks, just to kick off the discussion, I wanted to show you some results of a survey that the three projects have shared among their stakeholders in the last weeks. So we asked to our stakeholders which market stakeholders are currently interested in investing in energy efficiency projects, and the answers that we actually received are, so the most common, let's say, answer was national governments, but then what they perceived is also that citizens, real estate companies, and TSO and DSOs are quite actually interested in investing in energy efficiency projects. So this is the results. Now I want to invite the first panel, so the speakers for for the first topic to join us, and starting with Philippos, who from the SENSEI project. Maybe you can tell us more about what you think about the result of this survey and what you think about market and regulatory framework.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you for, well, first of all, for organizing these introductions and for heading the survey. In terms of the survey results, indeed, these are the ones that our project is also targeting. I would say more specifically, DSOs, TSOs, governments, citizens to a smaller degree. And perhaps at this moment, I would like to present the 3 or 4 major regulations, directives, and on the EU level that help in achieving those aims. There are, of course, a number more secondary or supportive regulations, but I want to stick to the main elements. So essentially, we have the Energy Efficiency Directive, we have the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and then we have what used to be called the Electricity Market Regulation and Electricity Market Directive. They have been revised in 2019, but we can still call them that. And we also have the Energy Efficiency First Principle. So in these, we have a few very important elements that allow definitely pay for performance schemes to advance, but also EPC schemes in general. The first one is energy efficiency obligations. These are set under Article 7 and now Article 8 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. They require 1.5% of final energy consumption to be saved by obligated parties. So these are utilities, TSOs, DSOs on a national level. And is essentially one of the most important instruments we have at the EU level for pushing energy savings, obliging member states to achieve those. Usually these are done through deemed savings, so very general calculations. But Annex 5 of the Energy Efficiency Directive also foresees metered energy savings. And metered energy savings is essentially what pay for performance is all about. It's the approach that after we have a renovation of the building, we measure the savings. And if we have a smart meter, this can be done hour to hour. And based on those achieved energy savings, the client pays whomever did the works or regulates as a performance afterwards. So that's a major one. Energy efficiency obligation schemes and the provision for metered savings. There are other things as well. There are smart meters, the encouragement of demand-side resources and so on to participate in the grid. But let's skip this too. The other one is the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. Which of course requires and helps member states to guide down the path of renovating a large part of the building stock. This includes, for example, the long-term renovation strategies that every member state needs to submit in the context of NECPs and so on. And more we're also seeing the minimum energy performance standards being pushed. So these, along with previous instruments like energy performance certificates, and now that we have the smart readiness indicator and the promotion of smart technologies, set the building stock at a good basis to promote this. So essentially, we have the regulatory framework to promote renovations on the level of a building. But what we try to do in SENSEI is advance those renovations so that they help the energy system as a whole. So the ED also mentions that demand-side resources can be included or should be included in wholesale and retail. But the Electricity Market Directive and the regulation, it's actually the rules for the market, said that DSOs have the ability now to procure energy efficiency measures for the network, energy efficiency or demand response measures as well, either to defer investments or instead of increasing the capacity of the grid, decrease the demand. There is also provisions for the aggregation of demand-side resources, There's an encouragement of flexibility services in general. We would like to see energy efficiency, let's say pure efficiency, also promoted there. And perhaps the important one, I'm not sure if I mentioned, is that the new network development plans should include things like energy efficiency and demand response. So these are the main ones. And another thing that relates to the overall planning at the local level, at the national level, and so on, is the energy efficiency first principle, which essentially says that the ones involved in planning activities should prioritize measures of energy efficiency, both in the policy, their energy planning, and the investment decisions. A very good resource, if someone is interested in this, is the EnerFirst project, where you can learn more about it. So I think that's enough. These are the main elements in these directives and regulations, and we find that they do offer a good basis for our projects to promote energy performance contracting and link it with the decarbonization of the grid. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippos. Now I would like to ask Leon, if you want to add something upon this. Leon, can you hear me?
Been muted by the organizer.
Now we can hear you.
You can hear me now? Fine,
Yes.
perfect. Sorry, I can't unmute. You have to do that for us, Serena.
Okay,
so,
I will do that.
Leon, I'm the project manager of frESCO. And if you can go to the next slide for me, please, Serena, just so I can speak to what our particular project's doing. So frESCO is looking to sort of combine ESCO and aggregator business models, if you like, to make them more attractive in the market context that we're in. Of course, as Filippo said, you know, the European directives are driving towards sort of promoting these types of schemes and making them more economically viable, if you like. But I mean, the main problem we've seen in what we've been doing with frESCO is probably on the aggregator side, so on the demand response side. To put frESCO in context, what we're talking about is operating on the I guess it's called the wholesale market. So the grid puts in a request for a demand response flexibility. So that's an upwards or downwards movement in consumption, normally downwards, and that's certainly the way we'd like to go. And a demand response actor responds to that. Now, of course, in the context of the market as it currently is, it's much easier for bigger players to be involved in that market. You have to have a minimum capacity in general in whatever market you're in. So in terms of aggregators, they're not even allowed to be involved in that flexibility market. So in many of our pilot countries, that's closed. So if we look at our particular pilots in Spain, Croatia, and Greece, it's closed to aggregators. That sort of grid side demand response market. And in France, it's mostly open, but then you've got to make sure, as Filippo said, that you're favouring sort of a downside movement, and you're not favouring perhaps in balancing things to favouring production when you're trying to balance production with demand, that you're actually favouring a lower use of energy rather than an increase in energy. And at the moment, that's not at a national level anyway, is not clearly enshrined, I guess, in the national regulations. So that means that any ESCO or aggregator are looking to act in, or combination looking to act in the market at the moment, they're not able to act on the flexibility side. So we're sort of looking at a future potential market, if you like. moving forward, so when we talk about this, there's also sort of a market drivers, which are the attractiveness or not of the residential sector for efficiency and flexibility. And of course, when you look at the scale of the savings in an individual household, that's a problem that makes the residential market not attractive. And why isn't? Well, you know, if you couple the smaller savings with the fact you have to you have administrative costs for a whole range of different consumers, and perhaps additional costs in censoring and monitoring if you're trying to put in a data driven solution, which is what we're trying to implement in frESCO, then you additionally have further problems, or it's less incentivized in the market. On the other hand, data infrastructure can help you here. So data infrastructure can decrease the costs of packaging the revenue streams. So if you can automate everything, and you can have all those data systems in place to automate data flows and automate the processes, then administrating a large number of users with a small response or a small saving becomes worthwhile, or that's the idea anyway. And just to reiterate again, just to put frESCO in context, so we're not talking about responding to price signals. We're talking about a request from the grid for a demand response or a flexibility response, and an aggregator who aggregates residential demand says, okay, I can respond to that request from the grid, and then the remuneration is shared between the aggregator and the end users. And that's probably where I'm going to stop for now. I need to give time for Levin to talk, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Leon, for your input. So yes, indeed, as you pronounced. So Levin, would you like to jump in and tell your point of view? Let me check, because maybe I need to unmute you. So.
Yeah.
Levin, yes.
Yes. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot also, Leon. Basically, what I suggest is maybe you go to the slide where we also, I can quickly introduce the Ambience project and ideas. Because what we are doing is a bit different from what is being done in frESCO. We started from, of course, the idea that there is a huge existing ESCO market out there, with Ascos already serving many building owners in terms of energy performance, and what they're basically doing is delivering energy performance contracts to the customers, where they're implementing a number of energy efficiency measures, and then often also provide the financing and basically get reimbursed out of the savings that they are guaranteeing. And that's the basic energy performance contracting model, which is already a different way of doing it than traditionally, because you have this single ESCO implementing and designing and financing and often maintaining energy efficiency measures. So what we've been looking into is extending that basic EPC model to include demand response or flexibility, and building what we then call an active building EPC or AEPC model, which of course still integrates the energy efficiency measures, but in addition allows for active control, allows to exploit this flexibility. And we have distinguished between both models and what we call an explicit demand response, using explicit requests from DSOs via aggregators, for example, and what Leon mentioned. That has been a lesser focus for us. We have included it into the APC model, but we've been more focusing on what we then call the implicit demand response, using effectively the price signals that are available. Today, of course, limited in the market, but in the future, hopefully with access to more dynamic pricing, allowing for even bigger use of this active control to optimize the cost savings, and of course indirectly the CO2 savings, because the whole idea is that we can use the energy when not only it is cheaper, but when the carbon intensity is of course lowest, maximizing also the use of renewable energy produced locally on site, and going fully for electrification of heat production or coal production, for example. But in our countries here in the north, it's more heat production. So that electrification is really part of the business model of AEPC. So extending energy performance guarantees related to energy efficiency to include flexibility, demand response, and also try to guarantee to some extent that additional cost savings and CO2 savings from the demand response. We want to stick to the basic idea of energy performance contracting. It's guaranteeing performance and taking that risk for the ESCO. We also looked at extending it to a broader scope of buildings, and also in the pilots, for example, that we did, there's a commercial building, but there's also a residential building. And of course, some markets will be easier, but that's at least the idea, that we try to keep it broad. And that's of course also driven by the markets that ESCOs can and will go for. And we know, of course, that residential is in that sense not necessarily the easiest market, but it's a very important one. And then extending the scope also to groups of clusters. So maybe if you can quickly go back, Serena, to the first slide on the topics. So we have of course looked at the regulatory framework, but I think today our focus is also a lot on the market dynamics and the market framework. It's aggregating flexibility, not necessarily by the traditional aggregators that we see in the demand response market, but really seeing ESCOs themselves become aggregators, technical aggregators of flexibility and of energy performance contracts, as a matter of fact. The other thing is, of course, optimizing the business case. And we see today that going to climate neutrality often requires a significant investment in the building envelope through insulation works. And at least what we are exploring, I'm not saying that we have necessarily all of the answers, but at least the idea that we're exploring is can we not maybe do limited insulation for less investment, but then go to electrification, extensive use of heat pumps, adding to that the flexibility and the active control of the heat pump, and thus build maybe a better business case, improving the business case of EPC by finding this new balance between heavy, deep renovation in terms of the building envelope, and versus electrification and use of renewable energy in combination with active control of the flexibility. And that also, and there's very interesting results we've seen for some simulations on some of the pilots, is that also, for example, EV charging offers a significant potential for active control and thus for cost savings, and sometimes even more than the flexibility that comes from managing the heat pump. And then finally, looking at the market development in Europe, is seeing where are the markets more appropriate for this APC business model, and that has to do again with where we would get such dynamic pricing first, or where is the ESCO market today already more advanced and has a growth potential to start using also APC. That's it for me for the moment.
Thank you. Thank you for the panel. So we can now move to the second topic of discussion. And also here, I would like to present you some data from the survey. So we asked to the stakeholders about the strategies to promote energy efficiency and reduce costs of the energy transition in the residential sector. So, so this is the topic, and the questions we asked was, what are the main services that should be provided to achieve an energy efficiency upgrade in the residential field? So I would say the option that got most of the votes are smart equipment and automation, and innovative financing solutions, making deep retrofits with long payback times financeable. And then we also have great feedback for energy management strategies. So I would like to welcome the second panel. to turn on their camera and we can start the discussion. Lieven, you can go first now and tell us more about what you think about the strategies to promote the energy efficiency. And I don't know if you have any comments about the results of the survey. You can also comment on that.
Thanks very much, Serena. Yes, definitely. And I think the two topics that I'm most interested in sharing some thoughts are, it's the smart equipment. What we've seen, of course, is that smart active control is key to managing the flexibility, and it's key to our business model. But it is, in fact, at two levels. It's in, let's say, the pre-contractual phase when the customer or maybe an APC or an EPC project facilitator or the ESCO has to basically simulate what's the savings potential, because that's where he's building his business case or where a facilitator is building the business case for the customer. But then to basically make it happen, the ESCO also has to be able to use flexibility control software to run the flexibility in real time in the operational phase, and both have to be aligned. And I think that's already a first channel. It's not just saying, okay, we have some smart equipment or smart active control. Both in the phase where the business case is being built and where maybe the contract is being signed, and then in the operational phase, things have to be to us aligned. And we looked at software that's available on the market, and as a matter of fact, today there is very little solutions. One of our partners in our project, VITO, the Flemish Institute for Technological Research, has been developing such software. Today it's really like a computing engine, and the goal is that eventually this will be also offered beyond the pre-contracting phase into the operational solutions of ESCOs, but there's still some way to go. And so we think that that's key really to making such models, making the APC model in particular successful. It's being able to put the same software and the same algorithms for managing flexibility in those two steps of the process. The other one I think that's interesting is the financing. We do not necessarily focus a lot in the Ambience project on financing, but in other projects we do. And I do believe that innovative financing is key. Now the question is always what's innovative. One of my colleagues who's much more expert in financing solutions, he always says, well, there's no innovative financing. It's you just lend money and you have to get it back with some fee on top of it. That's the basics of all financing. And then of course you can design financing solutions and financing instruments to cater for specific requests or creating leverage between public and private financing, or to suit for example requirements from the government to keep it off the balance sheet and so on. But in the end it's relatively simple. What is key, I think, is the extension as ambition levels grow, and that's also the purpose, I think, with our APC model, and renovations become much more thorough and much more deeper. The goal is to really also extend the financing duration and not finance as today on 10 or 15 years, but go to 25 or 30 years or even more. And that's where, for example, banks don't really follow. And so setting up, for example, guarantee schemes that can support banks for providing loans beyond the 25-year term, that's the type of things I think that are very useful. Now, as for Ambience, fundamentally the financing question between AEPC and the basic EPC doesn't really change, because the bulk of the investment is still in the building. We could possibly improve the business case. We think we can lower the investment with the electrification and the active control. But fundamentally, we will have the same instruments probably in terms of financing for AEPC that we will have for EPC. But I'm happy to learn from other people's ideas on this.
Thank you very much, Lieven. Benedetto, maybe you want to add something more from the SENSEI project?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Serena. Thank you, Leven. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's Benedetto from the SENSEI project. And yeah, I think that in general, it was really interesting, this slide that we've seen about the results of the service, because financing really are an important fundamental key when you want to promote energy efficiency, and especially in the residential sector. Just to give like an overview, the European Commission estimates that we need around 260 billion euros investment per year for the next decade from the private sector if we want to reach the climate goals. So it's like we cannot do this alone only with government money, with the taxpayers' money, or with the final users, renovating their houses. We need some structured third-party investment. And what we found within the SENSEI project was that then when we talk about getting private financing into energy efficiency, they find two main barriers. The first one is that usually energy efficiency projects do not reach the threshold that they need in order for example, for an investment fund to get into financing a project. And the second one was the uncertainty. So when you, for example, when you decide to invest in solar panels, you know more or less how much energy they will produce, how much you can sell it for, and so it's really clear your path and your return on investment. When you do energy efficiency, all of this is not really clear, right? So you might invest in the renovation of a building, and then because of changes in the user behavior or other exogenous changing patterns, you get to the point where you do not really reach the energy savings that you forecasted, and then you don't get your return on investment. So what we found out was that aggregation is one of the ways that we can help external investors overcome both these barriers. First of all, because I mean, especially in the residential case, when we talk about this threshold, right, which is about 2 to 5 million euros, you cannot reach this kind of amounts only with individual projects, but you need to aggregate many projects together, and this will help to get to this threshold that they need. And on the other hand, you also solve the problem of the uncertainty, which is around the results of your investment, because it's really hard to predict what is going to be the effect of an energy efficiency intervention, energy efficiency renovation of one individual building. But when you aggregate, for example, 200, 500 buildings together, then the results are going to fall into a more or less known distribution. So it's going to be way easier for investment funds to manage their risk. This would work much like an insurance product, if we want to call it so. And the second point that I wanted to touch was regarding the current energy crisis, which I think is really showing us what is the real potential of performance-based energy efficiency, which is what we are trying to promote within SENSEI. So let's say the invasion of Ukraine and subsequent fuel energy crisis started, we start to see now some substantial fluctuations which we've never seen before. So like last week in Spain, we reached a record of 700 euros per megawatt hour between 8 and 9 in the evening, and this is something which has never been reached before. But the most important thing is that it was like that price during those specific hours, but then it was maybe 500 euros less during other hours. So these fluctuations are really starting to show the shortcomings, if you want to call it so, of the dim savings program. Because in a dim savings program, you give the same value to all the kilowatt hours that are saved, doesn't matter if it's during the day or at night. While pay for performance schemes, they allow you to actually quantify differently the savings according to the hour of the day in which they occur. So this is a really fundamental point, because then if we have, for example, 1 kilowatt hour in the middle of the day when the sun is shining, and we save 1 kilowatt hour in the middle of the day when the sun is shining, is not the same that if we save it, for example, in an early evening hour when people are coming back to their homes, the sun is not shining anymore. We get that peak from people turning on their laundries or turning on their cooking equipment. And I think that now it's interesting because while before we knew, for example, that from a greenhouse gases point of view, we had this difference between saving in the middle of the day and saving in the evening or in the early morning. And now, but we only associated this. Okay, it's more dirty, but it doesn't really matter, right? Like even the rates that you get from your utility company, they don't encourage you consuming during the day when the energy is cleaner. But now it's really starting to become like a very different matter from both an economical and geopolitical point of view, because at those evening or early morning moments where you really need to pump gas, now the electricity is becoming extremely expensive, and we increase also our dependence on autocratic countries such as Russia. So I think that there is really like a paradigm shift here, which is starting to show the real potential of performance-based energy efficiency. And yeah, finally, I wanted to touch a last point, which is that in general, if we want to promote energy efficiency, we should try to focus on or try to quantify all the extra benefits that energy efficiency brings. Because in general, when you talk about energy efficiency, you're like, okay, I'm going to get some savings on the energy bill, and that's it, right? But there is a range of added extra benefits which usually are not quantified, also because it's really hard to quantify when you do not have a hourly measurement and verification methodology, such as the one which we can implement in PFOA performance schemes. And this, for example, that you reduce the need for investment from system operators and utilities to increase the grid capacity. Or even also at societal level, like you increase the you help reaching the decarbonization goals. You help having cleaner air for all the citizens. So like there is a list, a range. You reduce energy poverty. You help people having also energy security. So there is a list of added benefits which we really need to stress out, apart from the mere energy and economic savings, which are going, I think, to help us go in the direction of performance-based energy efficiency, and in general to promote and reduce the cost of the energy transition in the residential sector. Yeah, I think I will stop here to not take too much time from the other panelists.
Thank you. Thank you, Benedetto. So we can move to Leon, and he can tell us more about the frESCO's point of view on this topic.
So maybe you can move to the next slide for me, Serena. Thank you. So in frESCO, we really focused on the data side of what you can do to sort of promote energy efficiency. And if we talk about that, so we're looking first at data infrastructure. So not just physical data infrastructure, not just cloud infrastructure and things like that, but sort of everything associated with that. So this is the frESCO sort of architecture of the infrastructure, if you like. So you have sensoring and monitorization inside the residence, and that's filtered through sort of an energy box. There's also external data coming in from weather sources and from sort of, for example, the grid side, if you like, to collect those that other information that you need to make decisions as a company. And then on the other side, you've got sort of different tools depending for the business and for the end user as well. And so this is about, I guess, promoting those changes in an end user that lead to efficiency, and also looking at flexibility from a human perspective. If we want to use sort of houses as a flexibility market, we need to maintain user comfort and other user factors when we're providing that flexibility service. So that means you need to be very on top of everything that's happening, get your sensorization right, your monitorization right, and then have all the infrastructure associated with that, and automatic when you can. So automated algorithms and things like that. And if you look at this this architecture, you can see some of those different modules that we're developing in frESCO to provide sort of that data-driven solution. And this helps us also combine the revenue streams in one package, because what we're looking here technically to do is say, well, we have a baseline, and then look at the change in the baseline in terms of in terms of efficiency, and then also look at the change in the baseline when you have a flexibility event, and so be able to really be clear on what the savings are and what the financial case is for these things. And additionally, with the data infrastructure, what other services can you provide? You know, on the user interface side, you can sort of push that environmental objective in terms of lowering CO2 and being environmentally friendly, and push a user to be more efficient in the use of their home. I mean, you think of homes today, how many homes are efficiently used? People are using their heating with the windows open. In summer, they're not closing their blinds or their windows at key moments during the day, things like that. And that type of user behavior, you can try and push it in a sort of a very obscure way, sending papers and telling people how to do it. But on the other hand, if you have an automated system that sends a message to a phone or something saying, now's the optimum time to close your windows, or you didn't close your windows today because we could tell because the temperature inside the house, or the data tells us that you didn't close your windows, try and close them tomorrow. That type of really interactive user information that can help them do the right thing and guarantee the savings, so that as a business you can rely more on what you're going to get from the residential side of things, because there's certainly an uncertainty there, I think, with businesses not wanting to get involved because of that user behavior aspect. So as well, if we move on, so I've talked about data-driven solutions to improve the ease of implementation. And as I said, that's all about this data infrastructure and how that helps businesses reduce their administration costs, and also about making it user-centric and things like that. So I think that's the main points. I mean, when we talk about what we're using in frESCO in terms of what we can act on, we're talking mostly about the key energy sources within the home. And so we're talking about HVAC and domestic hot water and how we can act on those things. And the truth is that with the devices that are in most homes today, it's an on or off approach. And so the data infrastructure turns it on and turns it off. But then, because there's some storage, there's some sort of thermal mass in the air, in the space in the home and the walls of the home, then you can do that in a flexibility sense and still maintain the comfort profile of the user. In the future, well, you know, maybe we get to act more cleverly on more devices, but that relies on them being open. And I mean, in the context of, I guess, this particular question, which is strategies to promote energy efficiency, I think the main point is making sure the user behavior is correct, and then trying to improve the business case on the other side. And for us in frESCO, the key driver is the data infrastructure and getting that right to maximize the savings in terms of energy and CO2 and the business case. And I think that's probably where I'll leave it.
Thank you, Leon, for your input. So we can now go to the third topic of discussion, which is emerging business models and actors. Here, as you can see, we also have some results from the survey where we asked what are the main reasons why Ascos and DR aggregators should focus more on the residential sector. So as you can see, we have a lot of difference among the answers. The most voted answers are the overall energy saving potential and the large replication potential. So I welcome now the panel for this third topic, so we can discuss more about business models and actors and the results of the survey. And I welcome to speak Charles Henry from SENSEI Project.
Yes, hello, thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, I personally I can fully agree with the results of what we have seen in the survey. There is a huge potential in energy retrofitting in the residential sector, also in other sectors, but we're focusing now on the residential sector. There is a need also for if we want to reach the climate goals, as has been said already by previous speakers, to take on that that very large task of energy renovation and deep energy renovation in the residential sector, and also, and that is interesting towards the topic of today, pay for performance. There is this large replication potential, and we see examples of that, especially in social housing compounds, villages, where many houses can be renovated according to the same type of technology, processes, because you have the same type of buildings located on the same site. A lot has been said already, and will be said, I think, by frESCO and Ambience partners more on the technological part of the topic of today. And on the operational part, I would like to focus on my second bullet point here. We learned about the emerging business models by looking mainly at existing examples of pay-for-performance programs that have been deployed in the United States. The idea and the concept originated there as the idea of, at the start, of replacing energy efficiency obligation schemes, subsidies if you want, based on deemed savings by metered savings programs. So incentives, tariffs, financial incentives for energy renovation based on metered results, metered savings. And these savings deliver other benefits, also multiple benefits, like, for instance, grid benefits for a system operator. And so maybe the system operator is ready to pay for that benefit. And also, for instance, carbon benefits, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which would be a goal to achieve for public authorities or climate agencies, etc. So maybe they also want to participate as initiators, as sponsors in pay-for-performance programs, and allocate some money to it per saved kilowatt hour. Of course, this will only work, this trading and financial quantification of additional benefits of energy saving programs, if the volume of energy savings is large enough. And so there comes, that's really the point I think I want us to focus on. There is that role of aggregator. Basically, the role of the aggregator is to aggregate, of course, but to aggregate many little energy saving projects towards one big lump of energy efficiency that can be traded as a resource towards other stakeholders that can reap benefits from it and are ready to pay for it. Like I said, for instance, system operators, climate agencies, maybe other stakeholders that would like to pay to see more energy efficiency happening. So this role of aggregator, it could be an existing stakeholder, like, for instance, a system operator, because the system operator has access to metering data, a lot of client data, site data, technical data about its customer base. But we have seen mainly independent aggregators, which is a new role. One of the examples you can look at is Franklin Energy. It's an example in the US, and they focus on realizing programs that they subcontract from, for instance, system operators. System operators will tender a pay-for-performance program, and an aggregator will take that mission, that work to aggregate many energy-saving projects, many customers to achieve a certain goal of saved megawatt hours, gigawatt hours at a certain price. It's not only, so that's the first role. Second role is another type of aggregation. It's the aggregation of the multiple benefits. We've spoken already about them before, and I've mentioned them, for instance, the grid benefits or the carbon benefits. These are all new revenue streams that actually exist, but are not reaped or not captured in the business model of EPC today. and certainly not in the residential sector. So this could make the business case more interesting, but somebody has to do it, has to make a business model around it, and typically that would be the aggregator. So the aggregator will not only aggregate projects, they will aggregate benefits also. And then I think a third very important point, what we have seen until now, it has been mentioned, I think, a little bit by Benedetto, in the energy efficiency scene in Europe. We have a large savings potential. We have a lot of money at financial institutions that want to invest in energy saving, but the connection is not really happening. Still, I think there is a financial world speaking its own language, a technical energy efficiency world speaking its own language, and a lot of work to be done by the financial institutions to evaluate projects on a project-by-project basis. So the due diligence, all the administration around the evaluation of profitability of energy-saving projects is too much work if it's to be done for a few €100,000 of investment. Financial institutions want to invest in 100 million, 200 million, that type of investment tickets. So that is also a role, and I would say an added value of the aggregator is to bring together financial world and the technical world, define together rules for eligibility, so the eligibility criteria for energy saving projects that can participate in the program. So that goes quicker, and there is a lot less due diligence and administrative work per invested euro. And I think there is really a very interesting, I would say, emerging role, new role and business model for financing energy efficiency savings. So I think I would leave it to that and leave the advanced measurement and the technologies more maybe to the two other partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we can move now to Janice and what he can tell us more about from frESCO's point of view.
Okay, thank you, Serena. I'm Yanis. I represent here Linverd, which is a company that actually operates in the market as an aggregator, yet not a demand response aggregator. Since, as Leon Nielsen said before, this kind of, let's say, this kind of market participation is not yet open in Greece. That said, we also see as a very, let's say, a very big potential in harnessing, in a sense, or exploiting all the energy that is consumed and is requested by small, let's say, residential loads, which when aggregated become quite significant. That said, what we have in mind when we try to, let's say, discuss and define the new business models that we are looking into in frESCO is actually the time. Serena, could you please show the next slide so we can discuss a bit? No, yes, this one, thank you very much. No, the previous one with the time, this one. Thank you very much. So what has time have to do with all this process? We can, let's say, divide all the contract, all the installation and the revenues or the savings that can be produced, and all the lifetime of the project into 3 separate periods. The first period has to do with baselining, let's say, the cost, calculating potential savings according to the interventions that we're going to make in a building, or the potential that we may have from some kind of market participation from an aggregation point of view. The second period is actually the contract itself, when any kind of savings or revenues have to be deployed in a way that the initial investment has to, let's say, get paid out. And the third part, the third period, is when the contract actually has ended. So all the benefits, the savings, or the revenues that can take place through the interventions that we've made actually pass directly to the final consumer. So the most critical part in everything that has to do with these new business models is how we can shorten the contract duration that has to do with the payback period of the initial investment. Meaning that the shorter the period is, the more sense the investment itself makes. That said, what has actually to take place for this to happen is extensive automation, analytics, and data manipulation in a way that can harness or can let's say exploit the full potential of the equipment that is installed. Unless extensive automation is used in these business models, then the payback periods are moved forward, and thus these kind of investments don't seem to be extremely, let's say, attractive. So automation especially has to do with responding to market signals and making use of, I think Charles mentioned it before, making the best, let's say, selecting the best option for either savings or revenues. But having in mind that we actually talk about residences, we have to make sure that the comfort level for each person residing in the residence is not, let's say, worsened. So any kind of automation that has to take place, or any kind of, let's say, smart responses to either the market signals, potential their production, the batteries that we may have in the near future to a lot more residences, etc., do not worsen the living conditions of the humans residing inside. And finally, to shorten these time periods, actually, you don't seem to be able to do it without participating in the market. Energy savings alone, and we are going to leave this particular period where prices in Europe have risen to extremes, but energy savings alone do not seem to be able to pay back in a short time, a short time that is short enough, let's say, to make the investment appealing. Of course, now when we have prices, I think Benedetto mentioned in Spain 700 euros. Here in Greece, we had a record of 550, if I remember correctly, last Monday. Of course, with these pricings, savings do make sense, but this is not going to be a situation when this is going to be permanent. Some things are going to change. So the aggregator in this process is essential. If we do not, let's say, harness the market in favor of the residences, all these investments are expensive enough to not make sense. And I think I'm going to wrap it up here because I would like to hear more from the rest of the speakers. Thank you, Serena.
Thank you very much, Yanis. So we can now leave the floor to Lieven. so he can present also the topic, so the emerging business models from the Ambience project. Lieven, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Serena. And also thank you, Charles and Janice, for sharing your points of view on this interesting topic of business models. What we did is we started, in fact, looking at the actors, and when we talked about business, we wanted to work around the business models, trying to understand to what extent are they the same actors that we would find in the classical EPC model, which is the case to a large extent. And we will see, of course, the customer and the ESCO, the financier, possibly EPC project facilitators, and so on. The new element, of course, is, if you look at explicit demand response, is of course the aggregator and the TSOs behind them. And so we included those into the ecosystem to try to understand how can they contribute, and focus then on, for example, the role of Ascos as technical aggregators of flexibility, as I also mentioned earlier, and it was also, I think, it's also in the heart of some of the business models that SENSEI and frESCO looked at. But that immediately led to us questioning the role of Ascos. Are they going to collaborate with existing aggregators? Are they going to compete? May they replace the aggregator in that business model? And as I said, become themselves the aggregators of flexibility and don't necessarily need the aggregators as they exist today. So these are a few questions that we looked at. On the other side, particularly with the implicit demand response, of course, there's the energy supplier who becomes an important player, which he didn't necessarily was before in the classical EPC. Okay, they provide energy, pricing is relatively static, and it's more a given. Price risks are anyway taken by the customer, not by the ESCO. But now, as we introduce dynamic pricing, the role of the supplier, of course, becomes more important. There has to be specific contractual agreements on that, and when you want to guarantee performance or even cost savings, it doesn't get easier because of the dynamic nature of the pricing, and that's where, and I think something Charles didn't go much deeper into, but touched upon it. It's really the measurement and verification. It becomes more complex with dynamic pricing than it would be with static pricing based. So these are some of the things we started working around. And if you then go into the business model, basically the business model as such of active building EPC doesn't differ that much from the EPC business model. It's delivering measures, energy efficiency measures, it's delivering services, and of course there are specific additional services related to the management of the flexibility, but as a business model, that as such doesn't change that much. So we really focused on how can we then improve the business case, again looking at additional cost savings from active control, and looking at additional CO2 savings from additional active control. And of course, you can imagine that the bulk of the savings doesn't come from the active control. It comes from the energy efficiency measures, but the return on investment, given the limited amount of investment in control software, is much higher from active control than it is from energy efficiency. So as I said, the second part, mentioned here the role of Ascos as flexibility aggregators. We identified that role. We developed it into the business model. We think that there is an advantage doing it this way, that you can build up basically the volume as you go. What we learned from some surveys is that, for example, aggregators and DSOs would require from buildings at least about 1 megawatt of flexibility capacity, of demand response capacity, and that still takes quite a lot of time, even for an ESCO, to get that. Whereas if you work with implicit demand response, the gains are basically done within the building directly between the ESCO and the customer, and it can probably scale up a little bit better. And then, of course, we focused on what I also mentioned a little bit earlier, is this integration of the control software and the algorithms basically into the BMS and the EMS systems of the ESCO, because he has to be able to manage the flexibility in the operational phase, and again, in the same way as it was estimated in the business case or in the contract. And so we developed some strategies for software developers to engage with software integrators or with ESCOs to develop these more operational solutions that are key also to making, not necessarily to the business model, but to making the business model work, basically. Yeah, I think that's, in a nutshell, some of the things that we focused on.
Thank you, Lieven. Thank you very much. So we can move now to the fourth and last topic of discussion for today. 1 second, that's fine. Okay, so the last topic is indeed risks and opportunities. As you can see here, we selected actually two questions from the survey we shared with the stakeholders. So the first question was, what are, in your opinion, the main barriers for ESCOs to deploy full pay-for-performance contracts in the residential sectors? And we got as answer, as the most popular answer, lack of real-time metering and parameter measurement data, mistrust of end users on the data capturing and processing systems, but also lack of accurate baselining and forecast models got quite a lot of votes. Then about what would be the main barriers, risks when aggregating energy upgrade projects. As you see here, the situation is a little bit different. So there is like small difference among the answers, but the most voted answer is unfavorable cost allocations. So I will welcome now the panel for this fourth and last topic of discussion, and we can go more into details and discuss more about the feedback we received and see if also our speakers have the same perceptions as the stakeholders or it is a little bit different. So I would welcome now Leon, who can tell us something more.
So, I mean, looking at the survey, this is a survey when you're trying to predict the future, maybe it's a little bit less clear what the answer is. I mean, from our side on frESCO, of course, we agree with all the things about digital infrastructure, and also when you create the business models, there's this difficulty with how you share the revenue, if you like. And from our point of view, the idea is giving the end user as much other value as you possibly can, so that there is sufficient revenue for the business model to be viable. And by other value, there's all sorts of other value you can get when you put in sort of a whole data and metering system that measures temperature and things like that. So that overlaps a little bit with, I guess, smart home systems, which don't even care about energy efficiency, and that leads into some of the risks and opportunities, which I'm going to talk about now. So, I mean, related to what the results are, so one of the big things we see is data flow automation and trust in data. So we can see that the digital infrastructure and the technological developments are improving the viability of the solutions and improving the trust as well. So, I mean, there's some effort to be made in teaching people what blockchain and what digital ledgers are, but at the end of that is a trust on the consumer side and on the business side in all the data and the whole stream of information, and also the revenues that come out of that, because the end users have to feel that the system is transparent and that they are being correctly remunerated for what's happening in their houses. And it's new technology that makes that possible. So I think that's great. At the moment, in terms of what we can do, I mean, the legacy devices that we're looking at in frESCO, the easiest way to deal with them is to turn them on and off. And that's another problem related to the sort of the risks in the future. I mean, what you want to see is sort of a standardization of the protocols for communicating with smart devices, so that they're open. And I mean, that goes as much for the device installed in the home, whether it's a heat pump or whatever it is. I mean, maybe further in the future, we're talking about going down the scale of what the most intensive energy use devices are to other things like fridges and things like that, for example. But at the moment, I would say heat pumps and things like that, make them smart and make the protocol something that everyone can connect to. And that also goes for smart metering. Sort of the availability of that data has to be open, and I mean that's something that needs to be worked towards, so that business actors can get the data and use the data, and the models can progress. I mean, if you go to the next page for me, Sharina. So I mean, this sort of is a vision of the future, if you like. So the smart buildings and smart grids. So what does that mean? We've got an electricity network, but what you need to do is create a data network as well. And in order for the business actors to get involved and for the business models to work, that there needs to be low cost associated with the data. So that means you don't want to have multiple instances of the same infrastructure installed or things like that. So in that sense, make it open so that different actors can get involved in the data flow. Try and stop sort of closed data systems, if you like, so that one company goes and installs a system that doesn't operate well with other systems. And that's true of individual smart devices, as it is true of a home automation system, for example, which an ESCO or an aggregator in the future might want to connect into and try and use as part of their business model. Of course, other things to think about, there's a huge opportunity. We've already talked about that. And it's about how do we open up that opportunity. I mean, in frESCO, we see the method as being data-driven, and that's what we sort of focus on in many respects, is the data-driven approach. And I mean, that's sort of where we're going, I guess. What we don't want, and to be very clear, is closed and fragmented markets and data monopolies. That's not a good place to be, and that would certainly slow down the market development in this area. And of course, to stop that, regulation and standardization from the top down to take into account the needs of market actors and make sure that everything sort of remains open and doesn't develop in a way where you have closed data systems and closed markets and things don't work as well as they could. I think I'll leave it there and leave the floor to other speakers.
Thank you very much, Leon. So we can move now to Benedetto, so he can provide his inputs from SENSEI project.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And yeah, basically, I agree with Leon on all the points that he showed us. Like from one side, we have let's say the technological development that we have to go in a direction where we need to open data, we need to create the infrastructure, which is going to be necessary for enabling all these new business models for energy efficiency. And then on the other side, we have the policy level, right? The regulation level. So what we've seen in SENSEI is that like from the policy level and the regulation level, like the switch from dim savings to performance-based savings and demand-side flexibility business models is not really a priority at the moment. I mean, we have to remember, like, the actual, the current system that we have now to incentivize energy savings is something which is, it is only because before we didn't have the data and the technological infrastructure for it to be in a different way, right? Now we do have the data, but when you want to switch something like so big, you need like a certain momentum in order to break all the barriers, right? So from the, let's say, the business point of view, it's not really clear yet if this is going to be, if these new business models are going to be profitable or not. Investors are diffident because every time that there's something new, in general, like the sentiment is of difference until when it's actually proven that it's going to be working. And also at the policy level, like I think the institutions do not really see yet the case for performance-based savings, especially when it comes to, for example, private residential users. I think that there is fear that this kind of schemes could reduce the interest for energy efficiency projects. Like if I have to ask for a grant to renovate my house and I will have all the money before, it's way different than if I ask for money to renovate my house, but I will only get the money if I can prove that month by month or hour by hour I'm actually achieving savings with whichever renovation I implemented. And then also at EU level, we also have this, let's say, difference that we see with the United States, which is one of the cases that we analyze in the SENSEI project, because United States is actually the first country when the P4P, P4Performance pilots for energy efficiency actually appeared. So we were studying like what are the different market conditions between Europe and the US. And we actually saw that there is a significant difference in infrastructure, in network infrastructure. So in the US, they have lower, they have smaller capacity for electricity. They have more outdated infrastructure, and this is actually causing some real pains. You know, like in the last years, we all seen like the blackouts in California, we've seen the blackouts in Texas. Like it's actually creating some real problems that they need to solve. And to solve those, like they need to either invest in upgrading the infrastructure, or the alternative they found was to invest in energy efficiency. In Europe, we do not face these congestion issues yet. So this is another barrier, another risk, which is making like the development of this kind of business models slower in Europe. On the other hand, like if we want to mention, let's say, an opportunity, which again, it's in my opinion is rising now because of the energy crisis. I think like in the last weeks, we all started to understand that, you know, like the economical and geopolitical situation is creating like a crisis, which like everyone is starting to realize that fossil fuels are not for free. Like before, maybe some very committed people were thinking of, okay, I will save energy, gas, electricity in my house because of the climate change and whatever. But now, like we are starting to feel it, like it's more real. It's on TV, like they're bombing a country, and we are depending on their and on their fossil fuels. And like when you actually take a decision in your or in your own private life, it has like way higher consequences. And so I think that in general, this is also showing that you know, renewables are not a silver bullet. Like it's really important to invest in renewables, but we still need to solve the issue of decarbonizing those hours where the renewables are not there. And it's not feasible to install enough storage capacity to do that. So here I think it's when we need to start developing these new business models based on demand side flexibility, based on demand response, and pay for performance for energy efficiency. And in here I think that like yeah, the clue is that like the key point is that if before we were aware that saving in the middle of the day and saving at different hours, it had different impact from the greenhouse gases point of view. Now we see that this has a different meaning also from geopolitical point of view and from the economical point of view. So like if we see that, for example, now in Spain, and I think in all of Europe, like most energy utilities are losing money when they deliver electricity at the peak hours. there is no utility in Europe which can earn money when delivering electricity which they buy for 700 euros per megawatt hour. So there is no way in the current market they can reflect that price on the final user. So at the moment there are around 400 utility companies in Spain, and it is forecasted that only 60 will survive to the current energy crisis. And I think that the P4P actually can provide like pay for performance, and that in general performance-based energy efficiency can provide some business model which can help cope with all this situation and save energy whenever it actually has the highest value. You know? And yes, I think that's it. Mention some risk, and I think this is the greatest opportunity that we have to proceed in this direction.
Thank you, Benedetto. So we can move now and leave the floor to Lieven.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to come back to the survey, and one of the key results in terms of barriers was the mistrust of end users on data capturing and processing systems. And I think that relates very much to, again, also the dynamic nature of active control, where in a classical EPC, basically, you implement measures, and very often you look at the savings, the kilowatt hour savings on the meter. And it's very transparent to the customer, and so it's easy to create this relation of trust between customer and ESCO in terms of what are we saving, what are we guaranteeing. When we introduce this dynamic nature, and we use, for example, dynamic pricing, it gets very much automated, and it's almost like a black box. And at the end of the day, at the end of the year, whatever, or the end of the month, there's some number rolling out of it, and I think it's much more difficult for the customer than to, well, first of all, to control it, and therefore also to have trust in the results of the savings. If there are cost savings, okay, you can say, well, they're running through the digital meter, the smart meter, and I'll see at the end of the day what the bill is. But then that means that if it's just purely cost savings that are being guaranteed, the ESCO is taking quite a lot of risk, because if the dynamic prices are going one way, or the other way, the end result may be very different. So he has to then also cover for his risk. So these are some of the, I think, the issues around also what I mentioned, or what's mentioned on the slide, the advanced M&V that's needed to cater for this dynamic pricing. But it goes further than that. It goes into, I think, trying to solve some of these trust issues. If you look at opportunities for our case, I think, and for the APC business model, I don't necessarily think it's in the residential sector that much. It's what we're talking on today, and of course, it's what we also hope to develop. But I think that it's where also today's EPC markets are mainly, and that's, let's face it, in the public sector, the commercial buildings. I think there's a significant growth potential in social housing, because there's also new business models emerging, involving, for example, very deep renovations, using prefabricated panels and stuff, and heat pumps. So I think those three market segments, public, social, and commercial buildings, are really high. Residentials, I would like to see it, but I still don't see it. How to really push that forward. Another opportunity is, of course, the fact that there are tens of ESCOs in the existing markets in many European countries, and there's a more or less well-developed market, but we have a lot of actors, so that allows also for potential competition. And of course, we have thousands of EPCs in place with all these ESCOs, and not only focusing, of course, on, let's say, new build, or let's say newly to be renovated buildings, but just taking all of the existing buildings that already have gone through some level of energy efficiency measures using an EPC, on which we could build on top of them active control and basically make those into APC. That's for me a very huge potential, and part of the, I think, the real opportunity with existing ESCOs and existing EPCs. And maybe another one is electrification. Electrification is king today. We want to get away from, it was mentioned also, Russian gas and other types of fossil fuels. So I think electrification is being accepted more and more. But it can only happen when you do the minimum level of insulation to guarantee comfort levels. But that again is like driving together with, I think, the potential for developing the flexible EPC models today. There is, of course, yeah, as mentioned on the slide here, the market uptake is driven very much by commercial opportunities. And we're talking to Ascos, and we're talking about, you know, would they want to go into this market more actively? And it's always a question of, yeah, but what's the volume? You know, they're not going to do it for 1 or 2 projects or 1 or 2 buildings or even 50 buildings. So that chicken and egg story, I think we have to get out of. And that will probably have to come from the government, from public authorities that say, okay, let's put our portfolio, our building stock, or at least a significant part of that building stock into the balance and say, okay, we want to go for such flexible EPC business models, for example. Then there's the role of aggregators and facilitators. I think project facilitators play a huge role, particularly in the public sector, to get EPC markets developed. I don't think it's going to be different from the AEPC market. So that's at the same time an opportunity. If there are EPC project facilitators, they can help push the market. But we see also in many countries that there are not many and that there are very small players and they are having trouble already facing the work that's there today. So it's at the same time a risk and think an opportunity to the role of such AEPC then project facilitators. There are the project aggregators. I'm not talking in terms of flexibility aggregation, really talking about people who can put into the market large-scale EPC projects. Today they are, for example, what we call one-stop shops. You have some public-private facilitators or those type of organizations or large building stock owners at the public or private sector level. I think they're also going to be key if we want to upgrade and upscale the whole process. We cannot count only on the Ascos. The Ascos will provide solutions on the supply side, but on the demand side, you need to really have people that can aggregate basically EPC projects and then eventually a EPC project, I think. And the final one on deep renovation. Yeah, if we push for deep renovation, as we try to do, we come then, of course, into a little bit into the conflict of saying, well, we still want to optimize the level of insulation with the level of electrification of heat demand. Basically, if you're pushing for passive houses, you know, you don't have much need for electrification anymore because you don't have much heat demand. So that's always going to be, I think, a tricky situation. How much are we pushing for, in our case, APC models, or how many cases are we pushing really for energy neutral buildings in which the flexibility potential is maybe only limited to some solar panels on the roof and maybe some EV charging. But the heat production is going to be so small that there's not much flexibility coming from that either. So yeah, that's a bit my views or our views, I think, on risks and opportunities.
Could I respond to some of your of Levin's points? I just want to say that now in frESCO we have a partner who's actively involved in the market in France, called Thales, and their main market model is providing to social housing. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you to all the speakers, because we ended our 4 topics of discussion. So we can go now to the Q&A section. Here, I will leave this slide a few seconds. So if the audience want to take a screenshot or a photo, so as you can see here, you have all the email contact to the speakers, so to the people who presented today. So if you have further questions or you want to further engage with them, feel free to send them an email. So we received some questions, but of course the audience still has time. So if you want to submit your query, please use the questions chat that you see. So let me open the tab from my side. So we have, I received some general question that I will address to the entire panel. Then some of you feel free to jump in and reply. So the first question is, since you mentioned, wait a second, let me find it. You mentioned several times aggregators. Are aggregators public entity or private businesses? Who wants to reply to this?
Well, maybe I can give a first try. There are certainly private aggregators, especially in the P4P projects that we have analyzed of certain maturity in the US. These are private players, but it could be of course. They often jointly work with maybe some public entity, like for instance in the New York area with NYSERDA, New York Sustainable Energy Research and Development Agency. But the actual role of aggregator is a private one there. But I wouldn't exclude that it would be a public one or a semi-public like a system operator, for instance.
Thank you.
And may
yes.
I add here
Yes,
that
please.
within our projects we speak of two types of aggregators. One is an aggregator of demand response, and the other one is an aggregator of energy efficiency. And as to the extent I understand, it seems more beneficial that an entity does both, because sometimes, just aggregating demand response, you might not have enough buildings to do so. And of course, energy efficiency on its own does lower the overall energy demand, but might not respond adequately to the needs of the grid. So yes, two types of aggregation.
Thank you very much. Now I have a question for Lieven. So this is a long question, but I also sent it to you via chat. So the question is, shallow insulation combined with heat pumps and flexibility might be more cost effective on short term for the building owners, users, but it will not enable to achieve the collective long-term goal of carbon neutrality, as the energy demand from buildings would remain too high, and overall the sustainable potential for RES is limited. Can the EPC business model be adapted to include public incentives to make deep renovations cost effective for both the individual owners and societies as a whole?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, the person who asked the question mentioned shallow renovations. It's not as if when we're talking about not going for passive house renovation, for example, and leaving some local production or some local energy demand that we're talking necessarily about shallow renovations. For example, the residential pilot case that we did, the insulation level still allowed for about 60% energy savings. So, okay, it's not passive, it's not near zero energy, but it's still a significant. Sorry, it's still a significant amount of insulation, up to what we call in Belgium or in Flanders K level 60. So, and then the introduction of the heat pump itself, of course, we go away from fossil fuels and we go to electricity. The next step is, of course, for example, local renewable energy production with PV panels, and of course that will depend on the case and on the building. How far can we go? But there, at least the ambition would have to be to try at least to get as close as possible to climate neutrality. Maybe not on an instantaneous point, view, but at least on a yearly view. And then there will be some residual electricity needed from the grid that hopefully in the future will be produced more and more also based on renewable resources. So I think that's what we're looking at, and that's the way of optimizing the local business case, but still keeping it also as close as possible to the goals from a societal point of view. So it's not a shallow renovation; it's a relatively deep renovation, including the full building envelope, roof, windows, and walls, but not necessarily with 35 or 40 centimeters of insulation, and not necessarily with triple glazing. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Liven. Now we have a question for Benedetto. So this question is about your speech about tackling energy poverty. The participant is asking that if this is maybe a little bit tricky to apply within the usual EPC business model. He says, in practice, there might not be a reduction in the energy consumption costs after improving the dwelling of an energy poor household due to the pre-bound effect. Occupants were likely restricting their use of heating before the improvement. Did you look at the specific business model for the case of measures tackling energy poverty?
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's a good question. Like in general, when we deal with energy efficiency in buildings, we always have this topic of, okay, we are increasing the energy performance, we're reducing the consumption, but then there is always this, let's say, unknown variable, which is connected to the comfort of the inhabitants of the building. And we have the same in the offices, in hospitals, or in private houses. And of course, when you're trying to implement an EPC model in a private household which is energy poor, and then you might have some this kind of effect. In general, in SENSEI, we have tried to include also the comfort in all the analysis that we do, right? So we try to estimate what was the comfort of the users before and after the implementation of the measure. And I think it would be really important to start including these metrics as well when you do measurement and verification of the effect of energy efficiency renovations. Now the problem is that, of course, when you try to go to third-party financing, you try to promote a business model based on EPC, which is sustainable by itself. You cannot approach an investment fund and say, okay, we don't have savings, but hey, like the comfort of the owners of the household improved, and now they're warmer, and before they were cold. They're not going to finance your project with that. But it is the case today that in like most of the times, like we do not have only private investments, right? We have private and public investments. So the idea could be, for example, to make so that when you have an energy efficiency project, which is performance based, then you have, for example, some subsidies from private sector and some subsidies from the public sector. You could do so that the subsidies from the public sector would be mainly oriented into improving also the reducing energy poverty, increasing the energy security for the users, and so make it so that in a certain for example, program which is made of 500 buildings, then you might have, as I said, some private and some public funding, and having also including the public funding might help you include into this big program of buildings also buildings which are energy poor from lower income families, and which you might not actually detect the energy savings which we were expecting before, and which would let's say, allow the business model, a self-sustainable business model based only on private financing, let's say. I don't know if I answered the question, sorry if there is more replies to that.
Yes, I think you managed to reply to that. Anyhow, since your email is also here, showcase, I guess if there are further comments, maybe they can contact you. But I think yes, you managed to extensively reply to the question. I have the one last question that I've received. So in the meantime, I take the opportunity to invite the audience. If you have further questions, please submit them. This question is actually for the entire panel, and it says, okay, how the approaches developed in all the three projects that we listened today are addressing the uncertainties about future energy prices, and since the current situation surely changes dramatically the business case for energy efficiency investments.
Can I speak first on that? I would say that in general, what we're seeing is price rises, and price rises only improve the current business cases that we might be proving at this stage. So if we have a payback period at the moment which is acceptable, and price rises are sort of baked into the future energy system, which we kind of expect, I guess, then the business models will only become more attractive.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else want to add something to that one?
Allow me to add that also from a geopolitical perspective, it's important to reduce the overall demand of Europe as a whole. Perhaps we shouldn't just look at renovations as only from the perspective of climate, but we should also look at it a bit more seriously now from the perspective of energy security. There were voices on this, as Benedetto mentioned earlier, for quite a few years. These arguments seem to be gaining more traction lately. So that's one more thing. It's not just about if it makes economic sense within the regular market, but also what can we do in terms of overall security. And there are, of course, financing mechanisms for bigger projects. Perhaps one day we'll be able to apply the same rules that we have in bigger projects also through aggregation.
I mean, I agree that with sort of the change. I guess it's a motivating factor, the current geopolitical situation. I mean, I saw it even before this happened, that dependence on Russian gas was sort of part of a reason why Europe might drive to carbon zero faster than other regions. I mean, if I look at Australia, they've got, where I come from, they have lots of resources still in the ground. There's not really a strong motivation geopolitically to move to carbon zero. And I think part of the underlying reason for the push in Europe, even before other countries, why it's leading, has been geopolitical up to this point, and now maybe it's more so. But morally speaking, the moral imperative really should come from climate change. That's the main problem that we're facing. Maybe as a very immediate sort of emotional motivating factor for people who don't understand or aren't motivated by the climate change argument. Yes, I mean it's a point that you can use to drive harder right now because of what's happening and the immediacy of what's happening.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think climate is still the number one big issue to treat. And of course, when prices increase, which they will probably continue to do, maybe we'll get some lower price at a certain stage, but the business case increases. But of course, on the remaining energy bill, that part still increases. And so that only pushes us for deeper renovations from a price point of view. And the other way around, even if prices decline, yeah, you can get, well, my business case is much better, but there again, it also gets cheaper on the part that's still remaining to be consumed. We also see, I think, is that another major driver next to climate is energy poverty. With these high prices, less and less people can afford just to pay their bill, let alone invest in houses that they may or may not own. And the same thing for social housing, for example. There is no real business case for a social housing company today, because if any benefit there is, then it will mainly go to the social tenants, but it doesn't go to the social housing company. So there also the public sector has a huge challenge, in fact, to renovate social housing, which essentially is trying to keep social tenants out of energy poverty.
Speaking of energy poverty, allow me to plug two projects that we're involved in. One is NPOR, and it looks at energy poverty in the private residence sector. So essentially trying to solve this dilemma that you just mentioned. And there is also Social VAT that looks at what utilities can do through Article 7 obligations to support energy poor. Indeed, it's not an easy topic. There are some solutions emerging, but it definitely requires much more attention. Also, because of the potential backlash it can have on the wider decarbonization efforts.
We do have one advantage treating flexibility, is that we at least have hopefully some partial solution to price volatility, which is also important.
That's what I wanted to add, but you did it now. Is indeed the models that we described today, the energy cost, the energy price is not the only defining factor anymore. It's you also have the benefits that are being paid for, the grid benefits, the CO2, the carbon benefits, and then of course with flexibility you can actually make a profit out of the volatility of the prices, and build a model and a business case on it. So yeah.
What I would like to, let's say, add to this discussion is that in geopolitical terms, as you have all more or less mentioned, Europe has one way or another to, let's say, detach itself from an imported source of energy, which is imported in Europe. I mean, imported in that sense. What we have been witnessing, though, in the past, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks, is, in a sense, a turn, let's say, back to carbon. And maybe we should be aware about that, for not allowing this, let's say, circumstance to foil any kind of progress that we've done so far. Because I think it happens in Greece, it happens in Poland, it happens in Germany. We are going back to lignite in Greece. Okay, so, and I'm using it as an example, and an extra care should be taken at this point, because, okay, let's face it, fossil fuels might be cheaper at the moment. Okay, and may produce, let's say, prices in the market which are lower, and thus we can help by having lower prices for households to let's say preserve their income, etc., etc. There are social reasons, but in this context there is a great danger for the following months and maybe some years, 1 or 2 years, to lose all the work that has been done in the previous years towards a low carbon, let's say, situation in Europe.
It needs to be only a very, very, very temporary solution to the immediate problem.
Yeah, in Greece we have a saying that nothing is more permanent than a temporary solution.
I mean, in the broader context, I see, you know, the future markets are very, you know, they're indeterminate. We talk about current actors as Ascos and aggregators, and we give them a definition. But in the future market, many new actors could emerge. The the business models we have could be temporary, and then other ones could supplant them very quickly. I mean, when I look at what we're doing in frESCO, we're discussing a future market that's not yet open, and I would say that in some of the markets, some of the pilots we're looking at, it would even be sort of a 5-year timeline as to when an aggregator would be able to aggregate sort of demand response in the way that frESCO deals with that. So it's sort of interesting. We have to focus on the now and then look at a future that we want to reach and map the way to get there as best we can. And I mean, in terms of the economic context as well, we know where we are now, and we know that prices change and things like that change, and it's about how much governments want to be involved in these changes. Whether we talk about a combined solution where governments and markets work together, and that's sort of very dependent on sort of decisions made at a societal level and a governmental level about how we want to pursue these issues, and whether a large amount of public financing is what becomes involved to drive overall energy use really down, doing deep renovations that are government funded, or whether there is room for these models on the private side. And what we're doing here will help define that future. You know, if they are viable, if we can get there using a large portion of private finance, well, it'll go more in that direction. But if it can't, then maybe the public sector needs to come in and take over that. So it's kind of a very that's the future, isn't it? It's uncertain.
Yes.
But the public sector is also desperately looking for private money.
No, of course they are. I mean, and I mean, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. You know, if you can get private actors involved, and you can have those sort of, I'd call it a win-win-win. You know, if the end user is saving money and the business user in the middle is saving money, and you're producing grid services and you're driving carbon down, well, that's 4 wins. You know, and that's sort of the best case scenario we can get from our different business models, whatever they are in either of the 3 projects. If we don't have any more questions, do we head back to you, Serena? Have you got any questions for us?
No, no. I was leaving you talking because indeed I haven't received any more questions from the audience, but actually I have 3 questions for the audience because we have 3 quick polls that I would like to launch now. So I kindly ask to the participants if they can reply to this poll. So this will last like 3 questions. So we will have like 1.5 minutes. So I kindly ask you, yeah. So I've opened now the first poll that will stay alive for online for other 20 seconds. Then we go to the second and the third. So in the meantime, so we still have a few minutes. So again, if the audience wants to ask for a question, we still have time, like around 5 minutes. Otherwise, maybe in the meantime that we have the polls open, I ask to the speakers, I don't know if you want to give a thought, and I don't know if you want to add maybe something else about your project, maybe SENSEI or Ambience, since your projects are ending soon. They are ending in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you have some information about the final event, or you want to share other information. This could be the right time before closing the event. Okay, in the meantime, I'm closing the first poll and I'll open the second poll. And as I said at the beginning of this online workshop, so you will receive the material shared during the workshop via email next week. And actually in the next slide, you can see here the links where you can find the project's website and the project's social media accounts on Twitter and LinkedIn, so feel free to follow them so you get to know more. You get to know more about the project. Okay, I'll open now the fourth poll, fourth and last. And then I guess since we haven't received any further questions, I think in 1 minute we can close the event. In the meantime, I would like to thank all the speakers for being here today and really providing these very interesting insights about the frESCO, SENSEI and Ambience project. And I also would like to thank all the participants for attending this event. And I hope to see you soon in other online events. But we still have a few minutes. Let's see. In the meantime, I kindly ask you to reply to the poll. I'm closing now the poll, and I confirm that I haven't received any further questions. So I guess we can officially close here the event. And really, thank you again for being here today, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.